Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Brian Donner. I'm Vice President of Sales for Gibraltar, and hopefully we've assembled a very thought-provoking and interesting next hour for you of our IT catalyst. A lot going on, obviously, in the world of IT and delivering service from the IT organizations to your end users, people accessing your applications and so on. Really in the 25 plus years I've been at this, I haven't seen this much transformation in the way delivering technology for a long, long time. So very interesting to get the thoughts of these experts this morning. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Gibraltar, so Gibraltar is a company who primarily does professional services and managed services. We're specialists in the world of virtualization and cloud computing, and we're working with many of Canada's largest enterprises in terms of helping them chart their strategy of delivering applications to users and so on. Thanks to our partner Citrix this morning, who is co-hosting the event with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane Schick. Shane is the former editor of CIO Canada magazine, and he's going to be the moderator this morning and prepared the list of questions and so on. But we hope that you find this a very worthwhile investment of your time. Thanks again for joining us this morning. If you have any questions, comments throughout the morning, please let us know, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Shane?
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you for coming here. If you've managed to find this room, you've already demonstrated great strategic initiative. This is not necessarily intuitive. I don't know how many people have been to this hotel before. This is actually the first time I've gone farther than the lobby. But during the Toronto International Film Festival, I guess way back in September now, this was considered the hotel where many of the celebrities were staying and kind of the place to see and be seen. I think it switches kind of every year from one year to the next at TIFF. And I actually spent a fair bit of time at a building across the street doing a bit of work. And so I was here when it was going on. And there was a floor that I was working on that actually has a window that goes straight over to the sort of main parking lot area here. And one day during the festival, a whole number of people sort of got up from their cubicles and offices and went over to the window because someone had managed to spot Colin Farrell outside smoking. And this was extremely exciting. So everyone was kind of gathered on the window, and some of the women were talking about how hot he still is, and some of the men were talking about how awful Total Recall was. And, there'd been a number of meetings and other kind of things that day, but this was the most engaged that I had seen this group probably the entire day. And it's not really surprising in a way because, when you look at things like pop culture and movies and celebrities, it's one of those few almost universal touchstones that almost everybody can speak a little bit about, and many people can even speak kind of passionately about. I think in the old days when the world was even more male-dominated in the workforce, probably those touchstones were things like sports and cars. But more recently, one of the other universal touchstones that I have experienced a lot lately is people talking about personal technology, where they compare their devices, the features, functionality, the price, and all those other kinds of things. And it's still something that has not happened all that long ago. I can remember the first time I heard someone use the phrase, "nice laptop." And the person in question was holding what was then an IBM ThinkPad. Which, would probably, now it's a Lenovo device, and I don't know if it would be considered, the state of the art in terms of innovative design, but at the time, it was thinner, it was sleek, it was black, and, compared to what most of us were carting around if we were given a laptop in those days, what we had probably could best be described as industrial in appearance. And I think that, it wasn't until we started to see designs become a little bit more consumer friendly, a little, not just functional and longer battery life and greater power, that definitely drove a lot of the mobile revolution that we're talking about. But it was when these devices became to be seen as something of a status symbol, I think has driven a lot of what we're talking about today as the consumerization of IT, which, at least since I've been covering the IT industry for the last 15 or so years, has probably been the most disruptive force that I've seen hit enterprise IT departments. And we'll be talking a bit about that today. But in some regards, I think me in the media and a lot of us sort of in the analyst community and observer community can talk about just how disruptive it is for organizations. But in fact, I think IT departments and CIOs in particular aren't given a lot of credit for some of the groundwork that they've already laid for what we're seeing today. And a lot of it's the things that people wouldn't know about because it's all happening on the back end. But for a number of years, obviously, IT organizations had started to use virtualization technology to enable their data centers to be more flexible, more dynamic, more responsive to the needs of the business over time. And that's the same way that on the front end and on the device end that consumers are also expecting IT organizations to be more responsive and dynamic and flexible to their needs. So it's really kind of the devices and the way that they're filtering into the workplace that's kind of been a bit of a surprise for a lot of the people that I talk to. The other area, of course, is on the applications themselves. So I was talking to a CIO just a couple of weeks ago, and he told a story that wouldn't seem kind of odd 3 or 4 years ago, but I think is now so commonplace. Probably a lot of people in this room might have a similar tale, which was that he had gotten some requests from some employees in his organization to use some corporate social networking tools. I think it was Yammer, which is now owned by Microsoft, of course. And it wasn't a real high priority for him at the time. He had a number of other things that they were trying to do to help enable and foster the business, so it was sort of put on the back burner. And then it was only a few months later that he sort of learned, kind of by the by, through the grapevine at the water cooler, that in fact there was about 400 people in his organization that were yamming and talking about corporate strategy, including his organization's CEO. And what he said to me was, I realized that, if any of these employees left the company, I couldn't guarantee that I could deprovision them and that they wouldn't still have access to a lot of details about our corporate strategy that were happening in this very personal, conversational kind of way, and happening probably on a device that the IT department of that organization wasn't necessarily dedicated to managing and supporting over a longer period of time. So this is where I think some of the challenges come in, but it also creates a huge opportunity for CIOs and IT departments to be more transformational. And what does that mean? I think that when you look at the sort of user experiences that people are having today, not just on their desktop, but on their mobile device, their smartphone, or their tablet, one of the great sort of buzzwords in the user interface community is the concept of responsive design. The idea that no matter what device you're using, that website or that app will sort of coalesce into something that fits that screen, so you're not kind of maneuvering all over the place. And it will just sort of intuitively know what it is that you need to do and what device you need to do it on. I think that in the same way, optimistically, I think the smartest CIOs and IT leaders that I talk to are starting to develop what we might almost call a responsive IT strategy. And by that I don't mean a reactive strategy, because there's already been a lot of that. We know that the idea is that IT is always trying to catch up. But I think we'll start to see a lot more development of applications and resources that are designed to understand the processes, the transactions, and the experiences that business people want to have happen on the device that they want, and they'll start to understand how to prepare for that kind of transition. So that's hopefully what we'll get to and what we can kind of talk a bit about today. We have an excellent panel this morning that focuses, has a great lineup of experts focusing on talent and mobility, security, and emerging technologies. And we're going to work through a number of questions with them in just a moment. Given kind of the intimate nature of the room, we designed this so that it could be a discussion, not just sort of speaking at you. So I will encourage you to ask your questions throughout the morning. I'll be happy to field them if you want to raise your hand or just interject politely. I'll also maybe solicit your opinions from time to time and see if what we're talking about resonates with you. We will finish on time this morning, and I'll make sure of that so that you can can carry on with your day-to-day. So to start off, I'm going to ask the panel to kind of introduce themselves, starting I guess from from this side to this side, where they will introduce who they are, their organization, and talk about the top 3 challenges that they see or hear organizations are dealing with in 2013. And we'll start with Tim Hewitt.
Great. Would you like to do both at once, intro and top 3?
Yeah, that's
Super.
great.
Okay, so my name is Tim Hewitt. I'm a partner at Knightsbridge Executive Search and manage the telecom, media, and technology practice there. You know, in terms of just a quick look at my background, I've spent a good part of my career in the technology space at an executive level, managing sales and marketing group, developing strategy and implementing it. I only mention that because I think that sort of more pragmatic background allows me to really understand what my clients are looking for as opposed to sort of doing a mechanical search. So we just find that's been very successful. We've also tied that together within Knightsbridge with assessments of candidates. And I mention that because, once again, it's a very pragmatic approach to making sure that we're not just going through an intuitive sense of how well someone's going to fit and operate in a company, but have some data to back that up. So with that in mind, I think top 3 things really kind of come down to attracting the right people, you know, retention and succession planning. In terms of attracting the right people, particularly in the technology space, which I'm sure you've each experienced, has gotten, you know, just much more competitive than a lot of other sectors in the market. One of the big gaps we often see is someone who's a really compelling leader. So a CIO who's looking to hire in staff, I mean, there's just typical leadership pieces like being really compelling, having a great strategy, and really having something that's going to draw that employee in and engage them. And I mention this because, once again, it really is very competitive, and it's a space that employers have to think well about, have to think clearly about their value proposition, so once again, they can bring these people on board. From a retention point of view, once again, as the market continues to heat up, and I'd say in our space we're a bit of a leading indicator. We tend to see things happening somewhere between 6 and 12 months before they actually materialize in the market for obvious reasons. You know, we're already seeing retention problems. You know, employers will look up and say, no, we think we're pretty good, and it's a bit of a, yeah, you think you are, but one of my colleagues could come along and grab someone from your organization, and next thing you know, you've got a gap in a very strategic role. So I spend a lot of time, which probably sounds counterintuitive given the space I work in, but a lot of time talking about retention and a lot of time talking about succession planning. And the last piece is, of course, just that succession. People need to be, I think, a little bit more thoughtful about it. There's not one person in this room that wouldn't say, I totally understand the concept. I'm not sure how many of you could sort of say, yep, we've got a succession plan for the key strategic roles in our company, and if someone was to leave, we know exactly what we do tomorrow morning. So those would be my top 3 thoughts in terms of things that would affect the space that we're all working in.
I'm Kristen Napier, Senior Analyst for IDC, where I track the mobility market. So I track phones as well as tablets and e-readers, and I track the devices as well as the behavior and usage and trends around those devices. So what I can do today is share with you some of the data that we see, and specific to Canada, what's happening and some of the trends that we're seeing. So in terms of the top 3 things that we're seeing in the market right now, challenges for 2013, I'd say it would be around policy, devices, and apps, kind of from the mobility side of things. So from a policy perspective with mobility, obviously, as you all know, it's something that more companies need to look at and refine, especially with trends like BYOD coming into place. And yet, so far in Canada, up until the end of 2012, it was still really early days. We only saw 30% of companies, Canadian businesses, had a policy in place to address things like BYOD. And 44% had no plans to do so in 2013. So I really hope that 44% starts to change as companies see it's an inevitability that needs to be addressed. So that's policy. On the device side of things, you know, once those devices come in, either through BYOD or devices that are corporately purchased, they need to be properly supported. You need to provide the appropriate access for employees on those devices, and that's becoming extremely challenging. And in fact, we see a gap between companies that allow BYOD in their organizations and actually support the devices. In a recent survey we did in 2012, only 64% of Canadian organizations that were allowing BYOD were also supporting corporate email access on the devices. That means 36% of the devices were totally rogue. And more importantly, companies weren't leveraging those devices that were already being used in their organizations. And then on the app side of things, obviously the management of those apps that are coming in on personal devices, the development and deployment of corporate apps, mobilizing apps within the organization, and that's still a very new area for Canadian organizations. We found last year that 36% of Canadian companies had mobilized an enterprise app, so still lots of opportunity moving forward in Canada in that space.
Trent.
Thank you. I'm Trent Delkey with Gibraltar Solutions. I'm Vice President and Chief Security Officer. I'm responsible for basically all of the delivery services at Gibraltar, so our managed services and professional services. And I'm also tasked with kind of looking at where, as a company, we're going, where the industry's going, looking at strategically, just kind of where, like, just, you know, where the world's going and how we're going to fit into it, and how we can help our customers achieve those things. So I think that from my standpoint, the three kind of key things that our customers are faced with this year, the first two they're always faced with. It's quite simple. It's budget and security. And what I think is interesting is that the third thing that they're faced with is probably a big challenge, but it's also a good solution to both those first two. So, and that's really, I think I'm seeing that a lot of our IT departments kind of got blindsided in the last probably year and a half by, as you mentioned, rogue devices. But you know, they're faced with employees or staff or customers, if you will, who have access to tremendous technology for free. It's instantly available in the outside world, and they want that same experience with their internal IT departments. And historically, IT just doesn't work that way. They're slow, they're methodical, they're very much governed by you know, governance rules, and then they take an approach of basically building something that's rock solid, taking a long time to do it, and delivering that to employees. And that model just isn't working anymore. So I think the biggest challenge that customers or IT staff that I talked to are faced with this year is how to kind of rein in all those things that happened, which is a huge problem because if the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to fix. So how do they provide services that are on par with external things that employees are using on a regular basis, and then you know, and basically offer up services very quickly to the organization. And the reason why I say that I think that's what's interesting is that if they can achieve those things in an effective way, and there's great technologies to do that, that actually really addresses cost and security. You know, security if you build an environment that supports bring your own device or any device essentially, whether it's corporate or personal, you know, just inherently, if you do it correctly, security comes almost for free. It's built in. And then from a cost standpoint, it's the same thing. Like you're actually containing costs within the data center. You're driving. In some ways, you're doing something that's kind of tricky. You're pushing a lot of support costs down to the employee. So now they're basically taking care of themselves more than they would have in the past. You know, obviously bringing their own devices, so you're eliminating those costs. So that's kind of where I see things.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, firstly, I wanted to thank all of you for attending on a relatively brisk day for a gentleman that just flew up from Florida yesterday. But I do miss the Toronto weather. And obviously, I'd like to thank Gibraltar for putting a show on like this, which is great. I'm Derek Chung. I'm a Director of Enterprise Sales Strategy for Citrix. In case all of you are unaware of Citrix, we are a provider of infrastructure, both software and hardware, to deliver on a mobile work style for companies. So it's always interesting to be the last one on a panel on a question like this, because usually most of the points have been touched by the previous three. But I think on a more pragmatic sense, you know, I think from an HR perspective, I think you know, companies today are really looking at how to retain and attract new employees. From device and apps, obviously that's a big plus with the number of apps and devices that are proliferating today, and obviously from a security standpoint. I think one of the biggest challenges that really IT face today is where to get started. I think what they face today is they have all these challenges, whether it's BYO, mobile work styles, or you know, HR, but where do I even begin in an infrastructure to start to show value in the solution that they deploy and build and leverage that initial infrastructure? So, you know, today as we go through the panel, love to share with you from both sides of the story, talk about what Citrix started from a BYOD practice, as well as from what we've seen from customers and how they began deployment. So, open book today to all of you, and willing to share as much knowledge as I can on both sides of the story.
Excellent, thank you. So quite a range of different challenges that were raised, but maybe not what touches with everybody. Anything that was missed or not raised here that other people in the room might be facing in terms of a key IT challenge or priority that they're wrestling with in 2013? Or does this kind of fit in with what a lot of people are experiencing? I see some nods, but I'm not too sure. Any other challenges? Okay, so we'll assume that those are kind of what people are actually focused on. So Tim, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the talent question. So you talked about retention, which is an interesting kind of comment coming from somebody in your field. But obviously, it's a huge issue for people that are trying to build up the right kind of team to address some of these challenges. Can you talk at all about anything that is emerging as good retention strategies to keep for CIOs to keep the talent that they have and to build in that succession plan that you're talking about over time?
Yeah, no, so you're right, it may seem odd, but it isn't. So it goes back, at least from my point of view, it goes back to working with our clients, really thinking through their strategy with them and then helping them enable it. And obviously, in many cases, the most difficult piece to enabling it is the people. They're the biggest variable in that whole equation. So we do spend a lot of time talking about it, retention. I've got 2 clients right now who, interestingly enough, have just lost very senior IT people. And literally this week, in both cases, we've spent hours on the phone talking about kind of what happened and sort of how did this sort of happen to us kind of thing. And it's interesting because I took the time to do a separate exit interview with the people that had left because I really wanted to understand exactly what was on their mind, and then had of course a parallel conversation internally. Massive disconnect, as you would expect, in terms of what was going on. So the 2 people who left, really at the end of the day, their reasons kind of boiled down to exactly what you'd expect. Lack of recognition in the organization, lack of integral part in the company, or at least their perception was they weren't an integral part to the strategy and the execution. And at the end of all that was compensation. And I'm going to come back to that because I think the reverse is exactly what most people intuitively expect. So the lack of recognition piece was critical. For these individuals. The manager had not taken the time to ask these 2 employees kind of what it was that they were looking for, and I know that sounds so simple, but it isn't the same for all of us. If I on a one-on-one basis went around the room, it would be different for every single one of us in this room in terms of what we really needed. So that was a big gap, and then just doing some of the basic things that you would expect to see, which cost nothing. They range from simple thank you to possibly having them meet with someone even more senior in the organization. And then I think the next piece that's the logical flow in that is setting up mentors, someone that can help guide them through the organization. So I'm not telling anyone in this room once again anything that they don't know. So my suggestion would be just take it as a bit of a reminder to kind of bring up on your scale of things that you consider, and I guarantee you it will serve you well and serve me well ultimately in the long run. So it works all around.
So there's the challenge of hiring IT staff and retaining IT staff, and I think there's kind of a broader challenge around employee engagement and retention sort of across the board in the overall organization. And I bring that up because I think when we're talking about mobile technologies and consumer technologies and things that cause enterprise IT to rethink their policy and so forth, it becomes an important question. Krista, you talked a little bit about sort of the rate of adoption of bring your own device programs in Canada, and sort of the suggestion that hopefully they'll realize this is an inevitability. But how dire a situation is this, do you think, in terms of keeping employees engaged, keeping them on board? There's always kind of that suggestion that if it's not a flexible environment and offering those kind of options that people will walk out the door. Is that serious, or is it?
Yeah, I spoke with one CIO at the end of last year, and I was asking how he's sort of addressing, the delicate balance between trying to keep employees happy and also trying to do what's best for the company from an IT and security point of view. And he was saying one of the things that he does, because he was very much the type of CIO that wanted to have control of the situation. So what he did is he would engage, bleeding edge users. So these are individuals in the company, not necessarily within the IT space, but anyone in the company who's, they tended to be younger, but not all of them. And they really wanted to try the latest and greatest stuff, whether that be a device or an app. And so what he would have them do, and this was totally on their own time, weekends, after work, they would go out and try different devices that he would give them, or they would just go and browse app stores and check out different apps. And then they would come back to him with a list of different things that they thought would be really great for the company in terms of apps and devices. And then he would go through them and whitelist the ones that he officially approved for the company that fit with their policy and fit with the security practices that they wanted to follow. And that was how they were able to balance out what employees wanted. If those employees were closer to what actually employees needed to use day to day, and he wasn't necessarily the best person to always know what those different tools were. And so he found they had better tools in place now to address employee needs and make employees more productive and keep those employees engaged in that IT process and evolution.
Interesting. I spoke at an event for, I guess it was actually primarily municipal CIOs about a year ago, and it wasn't focused on sort of consumer technologies or bring your own device, but the subject did come up, and I kind of did a sort of a poll of the room to say, how many of you are actually, have some sort of policy or program in place today, how many are developing them, and how many are just saying, no, we're not, allowing that sort of thing. And it was interesting because it was almost a third, and a third of people who were actually there, some who were on the way, and some who decided, and obviously, given this was public sector, that said that no, we're not prepared to do that yet. I'd be interested in this room. How many people here have sort of a formalized bring your own device policy or program in effect? Is there anybody? So a couple. Great. And I guess are there any that are sort of starting that process now, or are starting to evaluate the options? So still kind of the same thing where people are kind of here and there. So Derek, you kind of offered sort of a story, I guess, about kind of what the internal experience has been at Citrix, which I think might be useful at this point to talk about. Sort of what, and I guess specifically, I'm interested in to what extent, if any, kind of an interest in engaging and retaining employees or satisfying their expectations drove some of the development of that program.
So that's a great question. I think that was one of the main priorities for our CIO. Was retaining top talent for us. If you look at a lot of our customers, and I'll give you a couple of banks, for example, their hiring pool are from college kids that are just graduating from the school. These kids also carry multiple devices, from iOS to Windows to everything in between, to Android. So it's very difficult now to manage and drive policy that says, well, here's a standard list of hardware that you can only use. You'll go and find a job somewhere else. It's that simple, right? So I think BYO and IT policy now also starts to drive into HR and the retainment and recruitment of individuals. So for us, it was really the same. We opened a fairly large headquarters in California, and we wanted to attract talent in California. As you can imagine, the talent that we're attracting had more than 3 devices. Like, they have iMacs at home. Some of the people that we were hiring had like 10 devices that they were playing around with. So that was one of the reasons we needed to attract and retain talent. The second one was we made significant acquisitions over the last 3 years. I think, Cheng, if I'm not wrong, I think we made over double-digit acquisitions over the last 3 years. So there are a lot of new employees that were coming on board that we needed to bring onto our systems extremely quickly, and we weren't able to control the devices they were bringing in, because every one of these companies had some different IT policy. So we need to bring them on board very quickly. I'll give you another quick example. You know, I joined Citrix about 7 years ago, and I'm sure you guys probably have never gone through this, but when I joined Citrix, we didn't really implement our own technology back then, okay, which was virtualizing apps and, you know, delivering it onto any device. It took about a month and a half before I got a PC to work on. I'm sure none of you have ever had that for your users, right? So a month and a half I get my PC, I realized that, you know, obviously everybody gets Office, but they didn't put PowerPoint in there. So as a sales rep, I need PowerPoint. Now, if you ever have been to IT support and you've seen how they actually push out devices with installed applications, you have to physically click a box during the Office install that says, do not put PowerPoint on there. That's the type of stuff that was happening. So it was almost 2.5 months before I actually got a working computer that I could use and have customer meetings outside of just taking the notepad. And that's the reality. We don't have time like that anymore. You have all these employees coming in, and they have to be on board. We hired 300 plus workers in 2012. All of them are on BYOD. They were up and running the first day they signed and attended new hire orientation. Because all they needed to do was install one receiver client, and they had access to all of their applications securely and quickly. And that's the power of the transformation that I see that's happening, and you know, partners like Gibraltar delivering to companies. I think this is the time, and this is the time where you need to really look and determine at what point that you walk in and that initial starting step. Because it is changing. And it's changing the way we work, and it's also changing the way we live.
That's actually interesting, because one of our larger customers were deploying bring your own device. It's a major retailer. And I remember I meeting with them last year, well, actually probably back in 2011. We were talking about, you know, the concept of security and cost reduction and all that kind of stuff. And the CFO, she spoke up and said, well, you know something, we're going to make this mandatory. So if it's as good, why would we ever deploy a corporate laptop ever again? So that's actually what they've done. Is now it's not an optional program. You pick up your device wherever you want. That's how it works. So.
For those organizations here that actually have a program in place, would you mind at all sharing kind of what the drivers were? Is it similar to the Citrix story, where there's sort of that pent-up demand, or is it more sort of a response to potential security concerns down the road? I'm sorry to pick on people, but I think you were one of the people that raised your hand at the back that has a program in place. Is that
Gibraltar?
Oh, you're at Gibraltar.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So any others that have a program in place today? That okay, for those that are considering, can anyone talk a little bit about that at all? I think you might have raised your hand as maybe thinking about a program in the brown jacket.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, there's both of you are. So, so where is that coming from? Where is this sort of the trend you're seeing in the market, or sort of specific kind of catalyst within your specific organization? Yeah, sure.
Well, you know, we're a small investment bank and dealer broker, so you know, our IT department is myself, but I would like to get rid of myself as an IT department, and I think there's an opportunity here to do that, and I think it's going to be a huge driver for small companies, which actually spend a surprising amount of their not only capital expense in terms of you know, acquiring hardware and so forth, but real estate. You know, like, you know, we actually have a server room, you know, in order to keep some things. Of course, we have some regulatory requirements and so forth. So, you know, we can't get rid of all the devices because you know, of the regulatory requirements and the trading platform and so forth, right?
Yeah.
But outside that, I'd like to get rid of everything. And our major expense is bringing in people to clean up computers that have got a virus on them or something or other, you know, or you know, hard drives are broken down and so forth. So, yeah, I think to sort of get rid of all device management and all own devices by a company and allow people to bring in whatever and then just get access to, on a sort of a secured basis, to the platforms that that a company needs, I think it's a brilliant move. And in fact, when you think about it, you could extend it and say, well, we already download lots of apps for our own personal use, and there are lots of people developing apps for that, right? And as a completely non-technical person nowadays knows how to download a program and start something happening on their machine. Think about that. People never did that 10 years ago, right? But now almost everybody does it, right? Well, use this app, right? And it works. Why isn't that happening in the business environment? Why aren't people developing very specific apps that can be marginally modified, right? And so you almost can get rid of people who program applications and for your own company. Why aren't there, would be my thinking, why aren't there business app developers, really serious ones that smaller companies can download those bits and pieces that they might need, right? And to further enable this whole sort of virtualization and elimination of corporate IT devices.
Yeah, I think you'll start to see a bit of that. I spoke to the CIO of Boston Scientific a couple of years ago, and they've done a whole bunch of, they kind of created their own little app store, which, I mean, it's not little, they have, I think, more than 40, it might be even 100 now, applications that they're people, so you could imagine how there'd probably be non-competitive but like-minded industries that might want to take advantage of those, and rather than build, do your own builds, as sort of those things get fine-tuned. It could be interesting to see. Anyone else willing to, yes, please.
It's been an interesting evolution. I mean, we have an infrastructure. We're a small company as well. We're a venture capital firm. And, what I've noticed in our firm is, and this started probably about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, that, we had some employees start to bring, iPhones into the organization. And at that point, I said, okay, how can we support this? And, so we set up our system that we could support, that. And in doing so, that was very interesting, but we never went down the road at that point to say, okay, what's corporate information versus personal information? And over the last year, we've seen just a real, shift where everybody in the company now has iPads. Everybody's starting to have different devices. And, how do you separate, I guess, the information on those devices, that's company information versus personal information. So we have an initiative to try to, kind of figure that all out. And it's interesting that, there are a lot of vendors out there that actually, make that fairly simple, at least that's what I believe. We haven't implemented anything yet. So that's one part, that we've seen a real shift. We do have hardware and infrastructure and servers and a virtualized environment as well on the back end. And the questions that we're asking, I'm sure many other organizations are asking as well. Well, do I want to keep that hardware anymore? Do I want to put everything into the cloud? What's the cost benefit of that at this point to manage a little bit of hardware in a data center somewhere versus putting everything into the cloud? So we're asking those types of questions as well, and don't have an answer yet, but that's kind of on our radar screen.
Interesting. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I'm with the Canadian Cancer Society, so we're in Ontario. We have 500 employees, and we have to support them. But it's not just them; it's the 65,000 volunteers that we have who also get involved in some of our activities. And we found over the last couple of years that as we get more young people involved out in the field, they're looking for their contacts to be using the same kind of technology. They want to have video conferences, using Skype and things like this. So we've looked for ways to support that. It also means bringing in more devices for various types for these people to use. But a number of years ago, back in the days of SARS, we looked at ways to handle our pandemic response, and we put Citrix in. Basically, you know, if we're gonna isolate you, go home and work. Use your own computer at home. And it evolved from that into not just being a pandemic response, but being a support program for our staff. The nature of our business, our population is a work population is about 80 to 85% female. Young families, okay? You have to go home early. Somebody's sick, you've got to do that. It's not that you can't work. What we've created is a culture that supports people from working where they have to. If you've got to spend a day at home, you know, you can still do your job. If you have to leave early, but you've got a big presentation to do tomorrow, you can get on the computer after the kids are in bed and get on. Well, that grew. They started to now want it to be able to use their iPads or their other devices that they personally had. And the only jump that we had to make to enable that was to put in a Wi-Fi network that was totally isolated from the corporate network. And now you can walk in and you're using your iPad and you're getting on with Citrix, and it's got nothing to do with this. And so it's not just, there's some bring your own device programs where they subsidize you, and I know Citrix has that, to use your own computer. But people have their own computers. What they really want is to just be able to use the device I have, not do that. Our next step in the big jump that we're trying to do securely now is to enable something where people with the smartphones can use active sync technology to be able to have their email on their smartphones and their calendar updates in real time, but still isolate, and we're able to manage that, so in departures or lost devices we can kill that. And the technology's coming, and some of it's there today, and just figuring out how to implement that. That's our current big challenge.
It's interesting, the kind of challenge of enabling people to work outside of office hours. I was at it's actually an HR conference a while back, and I can't remember who the speaker was, but they said something to the effect of, how many people in this room would like to be able to make your employees to work 3 hours more a day? And of course they all raised their hand, and he said, well, you already have if you've given them, you know, one of these devices, and I think he held up a BlackBerry. Now, what's interesting in the last couple of years, and even just in the last couple of months, you'll see sometimes stories make the headlines where a major organization decides to switch from one device to another, where, you know, they might have been a BlackBerry organization. There was a state-run agency in the U.S. that switched from BlackBerry and is now going to switch to iPhones, and you know, this was seen as a huge, death blow for RIM and all that sort of thing. But given kind of the context of what we're talking about, it starts to raise the question of, well, how much does it really matter, and how much will we be seeing, sort of companies give devices to people, and how much will they just use the devices that they already have? I actually wouldn't mind asking you about that, Krista, just given kind of the trend that we're seeing towards these BYD programs. Will we see eventually sort of maybe not the end, but a shift away from sort of corporate issue devices? Will it be more just people bringing in their own stuff? And there has to be some, I don't know if you've even heard any data around, are people using stipends, to the gentleman's point, or what the right strategy is?
Yeah, our survey data as of 2012 showed that 69% of companies in Canada said that they knew BYOD was happening to some extent in their company, and that's only expected to grow. So to answer your question, yes, we will expect to continue to see BYOD happening in Canadian organizations, and I think where the gap still lies, though, is the support of those devices, and I think that's been mentioned a little bit here. So with respect to the gentleman that talked about providing the syncing in terms of email, I mentioned that 64% of Canadian companies said that they provided some type of corporate email support, but that starts to trail down when you look at other things that you could potentially use your device for and sync up with enterprise apps. Contact lists, it was only around 50% of Canadian companies that had enabled BYOD devices to sync up with corporate contact lists. And if you looked at anything else, like CRM, ERP, corporate wikis, collaborative programs, all those worker type day-to-day solutions that you want your employees to be able to access, it was less than 10% of companies in Canada in 2012 had enabled any of those BYOD devices to be able to access any of those programs. That's a huge disconnect in terms of the power that's out there and in the hands of your users and what's actually being leveraged. And so it's a huge opportunity moving forward. And solutions for syncing and around managed mobility can obviously help with that.
Derek.
I just want to bring up one quick point to the gentleman Canadian Cancer Society. I thought that was a great example, not just because he was using Citrix. But what he did bring up is users. And you've heard a lot of discussion around users, and I think when you look at a BYOD policy, it may not fit all of your users within the organization. And you need to really segment the users that fit within a BYO versus the ones that may not fit within a BYO. So, there are a subset, even for us, sales and marketing gets BYO at Citrix. Engineers and inside sales teams do not get BYO because those individuals actually come into the office every day and will have a thin client access to them. They don't usually take work back home for them, right? Whereas you have a subset of other workers like sales and marketing that take a lot of work home with them and also bring in multiple devices. So as you look at a BYOD strategy, it's not just wide-ranging, every employee has to have it. It's where do you focus, where do you get the biggest value across the board, and also, Trent and I were talking earlier, security. Security is a big play. I mean, how many of you know of users that use Dropbox for company information? Right? One of the first things our CIO did was do a firewall ping. 70% of the firewall pings coming out were going to Dropbox. That's a problem. Financial institution, law firms, accounting firms, that's a problem. So look for users that have access to that sensitive data and then determine, what's the biggest concern that you need to solve with them.
I think that's very true. There's a really great guy who, unfortunately, he's passed away, but he was the Chief Information and Privacy Officer for the Government of Ontario. His name was Mark Vail. And he said, this was just a couple of years ago, that we have no idea how much government information is going through people's Gmail accounts that they're sending so they can work on stuff at home. When Krista talked about kind of the huge number of organizations that aren't supporting corporate email for all these devices, I think kind of it's true. So Trent, from sort of a chief security officer kind of perspective, how should organizations start to evaluate their IT security policies today so that they can align kind of with what Derek is talking about in terms of maybe different categorizations of use cases in the organization?
Yeah, a couple things. I think the first thing, it's not really even a security thing, honestly, but it's, I think it's one of the IT's biggest challenges is they have to provide services that are as good as things like Dropbox, but then are compliant with whatever regulatory things you have to adhere to. So, and the reason why it's important is because if IT can't do it, trust me, users will just do it themselves anyway. One of my favorite stories, some people may have heard this before, but I was at CRA, so the equivalent of the IRS in the States. Anyway, so I was there talking about iPads in the enterprise. And there's this one guy in the room, and he sat with his arms crossed, looking very sour. So after a bit, I said to him, let me guess, you're in security, aren't you? He said, yeah, that's right. He said, you ran it for us. You don't understand. We have to protect, the information of our citizens and all this kind of stuff. So that's fine. So the meeting wraps up. And as I'm leaving, anyway, he said, well, we'll never allow things like iPads in the environment, so we locked out computers and all that kind of stuff. But as I'm leaving, the guy who organized it took me aside and said, don't pay attention to him. We already have iPads running the CRA. This guy had no clue. And my point is simple. It's like you can't bury your head in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen. So I think security, one of the big things security has to do is, as an organization or like within the company, they can't be the people that just say no. They have to be people say, no, you can't do that, and here's 3 alternatives. And the problem is most enterprise security just doesn't do that. They are the guys that say no, that's all they do. They send you packing, you have to go figure it out yourself. So I think number one, it's really IT has to change how they're doing things. I think actually something else that's interesting is that ties back into employee retention in terms of IT staff, because people don't want to be like the plumbers of the world, keeping IT stuff running. It's not interesting, it's boring, there's no value in it. So I think IT has to really look at how they're doing their systems, and if they do them properly, their staff will be freed from doing administrative, mundane things, and they can actually do interesting things, like providing a Dropbox service to employees that's got some value. The other just a quick point I'd like to make, you mentioned that you put in essentially a public Wi-Fi, for people on devices. I've been saying for a long time, and I only know a couple companies that have actually done this. I really think that the idea of a corporate network should go away. And what you should do is treat your enterprise as a little bit of internet. Maybe you'll have some firewalls too outside but not so much for protection, but probably for cost and things like that. And so internally, build your data centers as though they were directly on the internet, and then every network port in the building, every Wi-Fi access point in the building, it's public. And if you think about it that way, it will change completely how you think about security. So now, BYO, doesn't matter, just plug it in. When you come to the office and work, it's exactly the same as if you're working from home. You'll use whatever solution you have. If it's like a VPN access or virtualized applications and desktops, that's fine. But kind of just right off the bat, you will get the most secure enterprise environment ever, if you think of it that way, as opposed to trying to lock down the walls.
I think that'll be even more important as we see more and more mobile workers. And I don't just mean I'm a mobile worker because I carry a device like this around. I mean because I'm working from home, or I'm in sales and I'm moving between different locations, client locations in my office. We put some metrics around this. So we calculated how many mobile workers there were in Canada today and how many we expect there to be in 2016. And we calculated that 68.9% of employed workers were considered mobile workers in Canada as of 2012. That is expected to grow to 73% of the employed workforce by 2016, so up to 13.3 million mobile workers in Canada. So when you're seeing growth like that, to your point, this is going to happen anyway because people aren't going to be in the office necessarily all the time anymore working in the same type of way, and so we have to put solutions in place that enable them to be productive.
How many people in the room have some sort of degree of work from home policy or telecommuting options for employees today? So quite a few are coming in. Tim, I wanted to ask sort of a question related to all this around talent. So we've heard a couple of descriptions around sort of the, I guess, traditional command and control sort of mindset that we would expect of an IT executive or a CIO. Given all these trends that we're hearing about, I guess, how do you foresee it changing the kind of outlook that an IT executive is expected to have in order for them to be a compelling candidate for a dynamic organization?
Yeah, it's a good point, and all three of my colleagues up here have spoken about it in sort of different ways when you think about it, right? So I would say, as just to come up with a simple balance, if we look at what I'll call sort of strategic business acumen and IT subject matter expertise strictly within the IT space, obviously the more senior you go, the more heavily weighted the business and strategic acumen is. We did an opportunity to speak to a group of CIOs about a year ago, and we talked about things like succession planning and saying what sort of things do you need to be thinking about as you gear up towards that. And one of them was, you've already got the IT subject matter expertise. You don't need to kind of go to conferences and develop more and more of that. You've got that. It's exactly what Derek and Trent were talking about in terms of, go find out what the business units are doing, find out what they're measured on in terms of what makes them successful, and proactively come up with ideas that are going to help them. So, it's much more engaged with the business objectives, much more focused on delivering on the strategy of the company. And it also gets to another point that Trent made, which is, you want to drive engagement and retention, get the person so involved, so intricately involved in that business. They're having a great time. They don't want to leave, and while it certainly works on retention, trust me, I would much rather have that kind of story to talk to a potential candidate about rather than some lockdown environment where some 20-something, 30-something brilliant up-and-comer is looking up and going, yeah, I don't think so, because you know what, I like to do some work later at night, and I have absolutely no interest in being tied to the office, or in fact my home. I might want to do it at the Starbucks over at my friend's house. So, you know, without that freedom, I think I'll pick this other opportunity.
So in my experience, IT departments can accomplish, you know, almost anything, but they will sometimes need to, you know, do a bit of homework in order to get prepared. So when we started to see the shift where more and more IT infrastructure was virtualized, I remember talking to a CIO not very far from here who is with a very large construction company, and he said, you know what, I don't know how to set up a virtual server or spin those things up and down, but we've had staff in training in order to do that. You know, as we see more and more need to support these kinds of new devices and new technologies, I think this is a question for, I don't know if anyone on the panel can answer this, but you know, as we look towards mobile device management and some of the security issues that happen, are there new or maybe augmented skill sets that are going to be required of IT people, for people like in this room, or for their teams perhaps, that they're going to need in order to get them up to speed to meet some of these challenges? And that's open to anybody who might be willing to take a stab at it.
Well, I have a thought. Something that we've seen, I've seen in lots of our customers. So everyone's moving into down the virtual path in the data center. So virtualizing machines and all that kind of stuff. And that's all great. But what's happening is that they're still really applying like the methodologies that they applied in the physical world in the virtual world. So the problem is that in the physical world, to spin up a new machine, I had to rack it, do a bunch of work. It took some time. In a virtual world, hit a button, it's up and running a few minutes later. So what's happening is that there's staff that are getting swamped trying to administer dozens or hundreds or thousands of virtual machines, and they're just like spinning their wheels and not getting anywhere. So I think one of the biggest skills that people should be thinking about acquiring in their organization, if you're going to keep infrastructure, is people that are able to understand orchestration, automation, and actually build a data center that's essentially self-running, and get away from the historical idea of a person managing a bunch of things. You should actually manage the orchestration layer and have everything manage itself. It's a fairly big step for most companies from where they are, but I really think that's kind of ultimately where the world's going to go, especially with enterprises. It's really like running an internal cloud, like service provider model instead of a bunch of silos of technologies for different things.
You asked about skills, and best practices comes to mind when I think of skills as well. And I think it's important for companies and IT departments to communicate best practices to employees, because now that I'm bringing this device in, what is the appropriate use of this device if I'm going to be allowed to bring it in? Is it appropriate for me to open up my personal gambling app when I'm in front of a client? I heard a story of one company that actually did that. He took his iPad, he was somewhere else in the world, culture, and acceptable practices were different there, and he actually had a gambling app that popped up when he opened up his media tablet, and the client was very offended by that. And so I think acceptable practices and best practices, it is important to assume that employees might not know what those are or what is acceptable in your company, and communicating that.
You were talking a bit about you have a very highly distributed workforce in a sense, especially with volunteers and so forth. How do you communicate IT usage in that kind of environment? I'd be sort of interested. Like sort of acceptable. Well, and sort of acceptable use policies and things like that. Is that really hard formalized for your organization, or is that
yes?
So that yeah.
They have to sign on. So even though a volunteer to get access to the computer network has to read and sign off on an acceptable use policy. And when we talked about Wi-Fi, it's not public. You have to have a password to get onto it, but no employee is restricted from getting a password. You just have to ask for it. And if you're a guest coming in, we'll hand you the card with the daily password.
I imagine it's on the other side of your firewall, so it's actually not directly attached to your corporate network. It's essentially on the internet. I mean, maybe there's some firewalls in place.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's a public network intern, more or less.
Right.
Yeah, I think the issue for virtualization, and I think Trent's made some good point, is that the actual the user interface, the administrator interface, and how we manage it is still terrible across a lot of these things. And I think there's huge opportunities there to make virtualization and the management of BYOD devices and everything a lot simpler. And the real nice example, by the way, is a company called Meraki that did managed Wi-Fi. They were recently acquired by Cisco, so I think it's fallen into the Cisco product line somewhere, right?
Oh yeah, I know what you
And
mean.
they managed Wi-Fi across corporate networks in a very sophisticated way, right? Every device talked back, et cetera, but the actual administrator could very simply administer and change the rules and the rights and for all users and all types and so forth and in all locations in a very simple way. Very, very elegant product, and you know, some of you may have come across it.
Yes,
Maybe.
it's like a
And,
Wi-Fi managed,
it's
cloud managed Wi-Fi.
yeah, no, you know, I speak some time back. I was trying to do something similar, but they did a really good job, and that's the sort of interface that's needed on a virtualization basis as well, I think. And you know, there's an opportunity.
Excellent.
So that's actually interesting. You should mention that, 'cause that actually is a big trend right now in our industry. It's people selling applications, even if they're installed or devices that are installed in your enterprise, they're actually managed by that organization through some kind of cloud app.
Yeah.
So once again, you know, the idea of your IT staff being administrators and, you know, turning cranks to make stuff happen is going to fade. Ideally, it's going to fade away, and they will be doing high value things for the organization.
Yeah.
So they'll help with retention, keep them interested. They'll actually be doing something of value, making money for the company.
So we've been talking a lot kind of about things that in a sense would help make the business case for some of these things. But let's try and get a little bit maybe more focused on some of the practicalities. So I think, you know, Derek, I think you gave a great point in the first bit of intro, which was, you know, the challenge, you know, where do you get started? And I think that's true sort of across the board in terms of IT transformation. But looking at this specifically, maybe you could start, or I'll just jump in, but how you evaluate what's the right kind of pilot project, you know, what is sort of, can you contain and, you know, sort of, you know, evaluate before you kind of deploy to, you know, wider kind of scenarios?
Sure. I think number one, you have to be honest with yourself and really understand why you're even doing this. Is it a cost-saving thing? Is it a security thing? Is it really just flexibility for your workers? I think you have to define that right up front and get the buy-in of the other executives with you outside of IT. I think that's extremely important because we've seen BYOD fail because HR didn't buy into it or legal doesn't buy into it. So understanding that is number one. I think the second part is now understanding what users really get affected by that. We talked a little bit about the users right up front. And then I think third, what technologies are really going to drive and deliver on that experience. So I'll give you an example. How many of you guys carry iPhones? How secure is that email? It's not secure.
Rock solid, I love that.
I mean, that's almost a direct link back to your Exchange server, right? So the users that have mobile email, what happens to those people? How do you manage that email so it doesn't sit on that client that has sensitive data? So you have to look for technologies that can deliver secure email on any device, whether it's iPhone, but managed by corporate. So now I've looked at the users that I need to face, right? The policies that if you are going to use an iPhone, you should have corporate delivered secure mail. And then now you have the technologies in place. So those three things are things that you need to look through and really prioritize as you drive a BYO strategy, right? Because the reality is, just because you allow me to bring in an iPhone and I can access my email, it still has security policies that aren't solved. There's issues around.
Christo, in your, I don't know if your research got this granular, but is there a sense that when people are saying that they're trying out a bring your own device policy or a program, are they doing it in a pilot project first and then expanding, or maybe that's why maybe some aren't supporting commercial email or corporate email yet? Maybe that's a phase 2.
Yeah, we've definitely seen it done in pilots and then rolled out with different lines of business and different lines of business managers deciding they want to use different types of platforms. As you know, you mentioned, you know, maybe the sales group wants to use iPhones, another group wants to use Android, and the company actually supporting multiple operating systems. And so we've seen that happen as well. But it does seem to be something that's gradual. One thing that we've seen that's lacking though is sort of the solution. So if companies, some of them get to the stage where they put a policy in place, some of them get to the stage where they start piloting and actually start using these different operating systems and technologies. And then one of the things that it still continues to be missing is the managed solution in place, then bring that all together. Because to think that you can really do all of this yourself, that's a very big task to take on. And so that's one of the areas where we see a lot of growth in 2013 is more and more companies realizing I need to bring someone in to help me with this from a managed device and a managed app perspective as well, because that's one of the areas where we've seen the least investment would be on the management of the apps side of things and managing the business and the personal apps. And so that's a huge area of investment as well.
By the way, Krista brings up a great point on both managing the device or managing the app. And as an IT executive, you need to decide which one makes the most sense for which user. Again, the users are number one. And I think you need to define what those users are. But it's very possible that you may have a management of the device strategy and an app management device strategy for a certain set of users, and then only a managed device strategy for another set of users, and then another managed application strategy for another set of users. It doesn't make it any more complicated. It just means you have a better sense of the user segmentation that you're working with.
Trent, you said earlier in the morning that if you do this right, essentially that the security will sort of fall naturally from that. How do you see customers doing this right? How do you see them getting off to the right start from a security perspective?
Really, the biggest thing is it's a combination of technologies. But when we talk about like a bring your own device strategy, we always kind of view that as a bunch of different things, not just, for example, getting iPhones or tablets into the enterprise. So we always think about it as delivering applications or desktops if they're appropriate to any device, whether it's a tablet, whether it's my Mac at home, or whether it's a corporate laptop that's right now. Delivering applications, desktops, delivering data to devices and syncing it in some secure way so that you can get rid of the haptics, those type of things. And then having the employee's persona persist across any device he goes to. So ultimately, the end user has a fantastic experience. But by doing that, you're basically, everything I just talked about means that everything is virtualized in a data center somewhere. And the idea of actually having applications, truly exist on devices, generally will go away. It may not go away in certain cases because it may be required, but even in those cases, it's managed in such a way that it's secured, it's encrypted. If that device is lost, you don't care. It's still, the whole idea of managing devices, and I agree with you, there's definitely use cases you look at, but I think the idea of IT managing devices is going to just fade into the past very quickly because it's kind of irrelevant. Another great example, like personally, I keep all my data, my personal data is on Dropbox and a couple other places. And my Mac crashed and burned last summer. That's amazing. Actually, Macs are real computers. They do die sometimes. And I had to reformat it, but I didn't care because it was like, oh, whatever. Because I know that there's nothing on my computer I care about. It's just a device. It's like a portal for me to access my stuff that's in a cloud somewhere. In enterprise, it becomes the same way. So I know all my enterprise data is at a server at a company, and I don't care what happens to my device. It's irrelevant. So that's what I mean. Security is basically built in. So if you do it properly, everything's in the data center, and the way you get data to devices is in a very controlled fashion.
No, oh, yes, please.
I was going to say, we're talking about there, one of the things IT has to get better at is supporting that, because the biggest security risk that most companies have is lack of education with the employees. There is not a regular program. You talk about wanting to control email and do that. The easiest thing around that is one simple rule in Outlook: forward all my mail to my personal mailbox, and I can now get it on my portable device, but I have no idea what's out there, no control over it. If I enable them to use that device, I know where it is, I can use some technology to control that, but they need to understand that. I mean, we just went through a security audit and ended up with the security auditor finding USB devices left lying in meeting rooms because with really confidential information on the device and just everything. And it's just careless. People aren't aware that they're risking using Dropbox. They just don't know. It's easy.
And that's what goes back to my earlier statement that, you know, your job is to give the users an experience and a solution that's so good they have no desire to use Dropbox or for their email to Gmail. So for example, you know, I think that's a really compelling reason to very quickly deploy an email client on any device, whether it's like a captive client or whether through policy you're allowing the local client to access your email. Because if you don't do it, what are they going to do? They're going to forward all the stuff to Gmail so they can carry around their device. So I think that's really and what I tell people most often is that, you know, like IT's role has completely changed. You are not gods in some back room that are decreeing what's going to happen. Like you actually have to deliver a service that's got some, like, it's compelling for users to use. Otherwise, you're going to say, well, I don't need you guys, I'll need something else. And it happens all the time.
So if they're not God anymore, I think it raises a question around what are they? And this is more a question for you, Tim. So we've seen, or I've seen some research in the last couple of years that showed an increase in the number of kinds of IT initiatives that needed not the CIO to sign off, but the CFO to sign off, or in some cases the CEO. And I think it speaks to how empowered and you know, what level of decision-making authority CIOs have over these kinds of issues. So we're talking about the kinds of programs and policies that you know, would really govern a lot of you know, employee behavior across all kinds of organizations. So when you're talking to candidates and when you're dealing with clients who are trying to recruit IT leaders, how would you describe, I guess, the level of decision-making authority that they will have to make these kinds of decisions, or how much are they becoming more like relationship managers negotiating diplomatically between various lines of business and senior management and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say the easiest way to net it out is particularly for senior roles, we look for business first, you know, IT second. So with that sort of context in mind, you know, you're right, a lot of it's relationship management. If we're thinking CIO or an SVP of IT, what we're looking for is someone who can sit around with the rest of the senior team and talk about the business. And that's all they're talking about. Yes, they're going to go away, you know, to the points that have been made here and think about, okay, if that's where we're trying to get to, if that's where our strategy is, and here's what the metrics are, then, you know, bring your own is helpful. So let's find a way to implement that effectively, as opposed to just being the ones that come up with the solutions and are consulted on that. So the ones that we're looking for are the ones who are business first, technology second.
Now, Canada is made up of a lot of smaller organizations, so I don't know if it's always the case, but there was someone, I think, ma'am, it was you down in the, you were talking a bit about evaluating these kind of opportunities. Do you need to engage, you know, I don't know if you have an HR person, is there sort of a VP of sales? Are there many other stakeholders you have to bring into these discussions, or are you just kind of at the stage of just exploring what the options are before they are even part of that discussion? Sorry, no, because you were talking about sort of looking at, you know, how can we split work versus personal. How many people need to be in the room to really talk about that and come up with a decision, or do you make that decision and then?
We're a very small firm.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's, you know, just 12 of us in the company. We used to be a company of 65. And, you know, it's everybody in the firm, you know, understanding that, you know, what's the risk of us using Dropbox versus having, you know, some other type of solution available where we enable that on the device.
Right.
And, you know, so those are the discussions we're having internally. And, you know, then just coming up, well, okay, these are the solutions that we could implement. This is the cost of doing so.
Yeah.
And, you know, does that cost, you know, justify the risk of us, you know, using those devices in you know, one way versus another. But, you know, I agree with everybody here that, you know, enabling each one of the individuals in our firm to use whatever technology they have access to the corporate information on those devices in a secure way makes a lot of sense. And as we hire new people into the firm, that they understand what the policy is, but having that all in place so we can enable any new person, you know, coming into the firm to use their own device, that they can, you know, work when they're traveling, when they can work when they go home at night. They don't need to be in the office to be productive, you know, throughout the week. So, you know, those are the things that you know, we're thinking about.
Can anyone else comment on it? How much of this is sort of developed kind of by committee, or is it sort of IT led and sort of the strong recommendation, you know, made and then talked about? Is that, I don't know. Sorry, sir, you down in the front. Is this something more that you're, again, a small firm?
Well, again, we're a small firm, so
Yeah.
you know, our chairman is our HR.
Yeah,
director
which is probably
and so
true for
forth,
many.
you know,
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
we wake up one morning and have an idea, and by lunchtime we're implementing it. You
Yeah.
know, everybody's agrees, you know. So,
Absolutely.
but say, on that same principle, I mean, the whole issue is you want your people to be productive and you know, not allowing some of this stuff to happen. It just impacts, you know, the effectiveness of your employees. So, you know, our thinking is always to make it easier for our employees to work and to generate business and to make money for us. That's what we're about.
Okay.
So if I look back, you know, there's kind of a groundswell of, you know, people that want to use devices, but the actual projects, surprisingly to me anyway, some very large customers came from the top down. So it was actually execs that said, no, like, you know, I've got this Mac at home, you know, I bought for my kids. It's fantastic. I want one in the office. You know, I bought some iPads for my toddlers or whatever. You know, so I was interesting. One of the first iPad implementations we did for a bank was actually for the board of directors. So, like, kind of like that's a pretty high-end group of people. So
They're usually the biggest violators of IT policy.
Oh, huge.
Right? I mean, you look at Citrix, Mark Appleton, our CEO, he's like the biggest gadget freak there is out there. And he wants to put, you know, he wants to see his apps in his Tesla while he's driving. But that's the reality is, you know, executives are the biggest violators of IT because they're the top. They're going to do whatever they need to do the business. And so, you know, like Trent said, and Krista as well, like when you pilot, maybe those are the guys you pilot first. And they have the access to the most sensitive data. And they're the first ones to throw it up there. A lot of times.
So there were a couple of comments about, you know, basically for IT departments to own less IT in a sense and not have to manage it as much. But many of the CIOs I talk to, I would say, are trying to also reduce the number of suppliers that they're working with. They want fewer vendors and fewer, you know, contracts and things like this. So I guess for the vendors on our panel from Citrix and from Gibraltar, can you comment at all on how you see some of the trends and shifts we're talking about having an impact on vendor relationship management, what's expected from your side and how you're trying to meet those expectations from your customers?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, as an organization, like for Gibraltar to be successful with our customers, you know, it's important for us to actually have a very deep understanding of what's going on in the technology world, have a good vision of where things are going, and you know, so that we can actually act as a true advisor and partner with our customers, and you know, and help them kind of make these decisions going forward. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. You know, that's always been a great thing to be, but I think it's more important now. And I think as well that there's going to be a change in role in IT, that they're going to become not so much creators of technology, but brokers of technology. So you know, their role will actually become, you know, the liaison between the organization and service providers. And I think that, you know, maybe it's a goal to reduce the number of suppliers. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, because you know, if there's this fantastic app that solves a business problem, a SaaS application somewhere, it's going to get used. You know, so their job will be to manage those relationships.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I think that's the reality. You know, companies are always looking to reduce suppliers as much as possible. And vendors, you know, the last couple of years, everybody says, you know, best of breed and one-stop shop for everything. The reality is, you know, as the IT needs grow, as well as what's required to run the business, I think it's going to change. But that's where, you know, the partners that you choose in your deployment become even more important because they become that bridge for you. And
in fact, something to what you made earlier about just getting apps for the do things.
Yeah.
There's a whole trend in the industry towards micro apps now. So rather than some monolithic application that does everything, I'll get 6 applications that do little bits of all the stuff I need. And ideally, they integrate somewhere in the back end, they work well together. But even if they don't, sometimes people don't care. Like, this app's fantastic, I want it, I'm going to get it. So I think that there's a real change in just kind of the mentality of how things work now.
So we're coming into our final 10 minutes. I just want to check, are there any questions that I haven't asked so far that anyone would like to ask our panel? Yes, please.
Krista, your very first stat I found interesting, 44% of companies don't have access policy. Is there any insight to why that number is so high? And it's not just to you, but it's sort of everybody. Is people just head in the sand, or are they laggards and waiting for policies, or like what's the reason? That seems like a high number.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a high number. I think with many companies I've spoken with, there's concern about openly admitting BYOD is happening, and because that means you have to do something about it. And then that means as a CIO, you're now responsible for doing that. And I spoke with one CIO that admitted to me over a glass of wine that BYOD was happening in his company, but he didn't want to put a solution in place or openly address it, because that means it would be his head on the chopping table if something goes wrong with the solution that he's rolled out to address it. So he was waiting for it to basically to be pushed down on him by the CEO to say you have to do this now, because it was going to be more work for him. And really, I told him I think that's a silly approach, because we know it's happening anyway. So you might as well, if you don't feel you can do it all yourself, get someone else in who can help you do it. And I think that moving forward in 2013, we'll see more of that 44% convert over to the piloting individuals that are piloting it and then rolling something out.
I should bring more bottles of wine to my interviews. That's great.
No, people really open up to you. That's one.
Yeah, I would also suggest that another part to that is simply that a lot of IT staff are seriously stretched right now. Like, and they're so busy just keeping things running, they don't have even time to think about it. So it's somewhere someone's saying we should probably do that, but they just don't have the time, the capacity, the knowledge. So it's we're just back to our stuff.
Any other questions that?
One more.
Yes, please. Keep it on.
For Tim, assume we're going full bore. Okay, we're going virtualization, we're going cloud, we're bringing your own devices in. For us gray-haired guys, the toughest interview is an IT interview to bring on the right person. So the VP level, not sort of the senior guys, you said business versus technology, but I'm trying to bring in the right guy from an IT point of view. What are the 1 or 2 attributes at sort of a VP IT level or director level that I should be looking for in bringing this new concept to light?
Yeah, I must say, even at a VP level versus, for example, something more senior, I'm still a huge fan of the business first, because I think that drives the right thinking in terms of what they need to go do to get the solution. So both Derek and Trent mentioned this a few minutes ago. It's a bit of a, if you really understand the business, you really know what you're trying to go figure out, they've got enough of the knowledge around the technology, not necessarily perhaps to your point to know what to do or to say, here's what I would do next, but to say, you know what, give me a couple days on this. I've got such a broad network of suppliers and consultants that I can just ping and get some information on and come up with a solution that's actually going to fit our company's problem versus, if you will, a knee-jerk reaction that says, bang, here's a solution, and it's pretty close. And on the surface, technically, it's going to look good, right? But respectfully, I'd say good isn't even close to good enough, right? You got to focus on the business and make sure you nail that, and then you don't get people sort of going around it, which as everyone said, they're going to do. That, to me, is the worst possible outcome. So hopefully, you get a sense of it.
Okay, great questions. Any others? Actually, Tim, I want to kind of sort of ask the last question to you. It's kind of related, I guess, which is, given kind of the shifts that we've been talking about and sort of the nature of the culture of IT and how that's changed, when IT executives or CIOs are being evaluated on performance in the future, in the past, I think some of the metrics were fairly well known. How do you see those changing in the future? What would be the things that define CIO or IT leader success 2013 and beyond?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, in the past, of course, they'd have, and perhaps even today, a dashboard which would talk about uptime, availability, blah, blah, blah. And you know, at 99.9% uptime, you look up and say, that's pretty good, except if you're in the medical business and you're delivering babies, that's not so good, right? So I think we're going to get away from those sort of common metrics. I think there'll still be a component of what's just table stakes necessary to make sure that you're reporting back on. But I think the leaders who, once again, can sit around with the senior team and contribute to the strategy and contribute to how we're going to start hitting those metrics and those growth targets and come up with solutions that enable that, those are going to be the ways in which they'll be evaluated as being, if you will, an above average contributor going forward.
Excellent. So I'm going to wrap it up there because I think we captured, I think, a good snapshot of where people are at today in this journey. It'll be interesting to see a year from now, you know, how far those pilot projects are along, how far those programs and policies have been changed. But before I welcome Gibraltar back for the final thank you, I just want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise today. Thank you for contributing and for being a part of the conversation. It was fantastic. And with that, I'll turn it back to Brian.
Thanks, Shane, and thanks very much to our panelists. Great discussion this morning. I hope everybody found the investment of time worthwhile. A lot of discussion about BYOD and the impacts of all these devices coming into your organizations and so on. You know, we covered it at what we could cover for an hour today. Gibraltar's involved with some of the biggest of these in Canada right now. We're just completing a couple of very large BYOD projects, and they tend to be quite complicated in that they cover a lot of different pieces of your organization, you know, HR policy, governance, IT, and so on. So if you want any more information on our strategy on that, how we're helping some clients, happy to deliver that at any time. And with that, I'll just thank you for coming out this morning and hope to see you all again soon.